This podcast is brought to you by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. By the Diocese of Huron, a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, Grand Bend to Port Rowan come together to worship and serve. And by Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be. We welcome you back to another edition of the Vicar's Crossing podcast. The Vicar's Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. My name is Rob Henderson, and I serve as the priest at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London, Ontario.
Yes, sirree. And my name is Kevin George. I am Dean of Huron, rector of St. Paul's Cathedral in the beautiful heart of downtown London.
I call it Orange Town now.
Orange?
When I go downtown. Yeah.
Okay.
There's
What?
like orange everywhere, as in
yes, cones. Yes, yeah.
Construction vests.
Yeah.
Like you name it, everything is orange down there.
Yeah,
I think it was an all year pumpkin patch.
Yeah, even on our front lawn, because we're installing a new sign. There's a bunch of guys out there in orange. Everywhere I look, there's somebody else in orange, Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. Incredible. Well, it's good to be with you, my friend, and back after we took a couple of
little
weeks,
break. Yeah.
Hiatus.
Yep.
Take care of a few things, but we're back. So we welcome everyone to episode 4 of season 11 of the Vicar's Crossing podcast. Today, we're excited to welcome back. I think this is his third time.
I think
if
third
I'm
time.
counting correctly.
Yep.
So welcoming back Michael Coren to the podcast today. Michael is an Anglican priest, a columnist, best-selling author of 18 books. His work has been translated into a dozen languages. He writes regularly for the Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, and the Walrus in Canada, and also the New Statesman, Daily Telegraph, and the Oldie in Britain. Michael lives in Toronto, and 2 days ago, or coming up, I should say, 2 days ago, his memoir was released. I am counting properly. 2 days ago, his memoir was released, and it's a wonderful story and a trek through his life. It's called Heaping Coals, From Media Firebrand to Anglican Priest. So we're going to chat about that memoir with Michael and a few other things, and talk a bit about a visit he's making to London coming up soon. So he's going to be here shortly.
Yeah, I feel like that, the subtitle, From Media Firebrand to Anglican Priest, embraces what Henry Nouwen talked about when he talked about downwardly mobile. I believe that's downward mobility.
I think it is, exactly. Yeah.
I think, but Michael has quite a story, and we look forward to hearing from him. Before we move on with welcoming Michael in, we want to, as we always do here on the podcast, acknowledge the brokenness in our lands by acknowledging that the lands that we record this podcast upon are the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenapeawakan, and Attawandaron peoples on lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. And these lands continue to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society, and people with whom we wish to do the difficult work of reconciliation and walking the two-road path together towards justice and hope for all.
We want to take a moment, too, to give a big thank you to our sponsors. First, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. Our good friend and supporter, Dave Mullen, has been part of our podcast for a number of years now, and so shout out to Dave and a thank you, and hi to everyone over at Miller George today.
Yeah, good people, really good people. I love those people. Speaking of loving people, I just saw our bishop. That's the other thing about being downtown, Rob, is that once in a while the bishop is over your shoulder, and I mean it depends on what's going on. You don't always want the bishop over your shoulder,
no.
But Yeah, but today was okay. I think it was good to see him today. We're getting ready
Good.
for our synod here in the Diocese of Huron, which will
Yes.
begin on Friday here at St. Paul's Cathedral. And so this is as good a time as any to shout out and thank the Diocese of Huron for sponsoring our podcast. The Diocese of Huron is a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound and from Grand Bend to Port Rowan come together to worship and to serve.
And I'll tell you, if there's one day that I wished I had Molly made over, it was Tuesday. Because
Tuesday?
Monday we had a dinner. It was Thanksgiving.
Oh,
And boy, the place was a mess.
yeah.
But I know to call now, Molly Maid.
Molly
Molly
Maid.
Maid is one of our great sponsors.
Yes.
Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Thanks to Tricia Listar for being part of our podcast too, and everyone at Molly Maid.
Well, I mean, who knows how to clean up turkey gravy more than Molly Maid?
That's right. That's right. There was a little leftover,
Yeah.
leftover, and a little mess to clean, but it was a good mess.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We always say we like to get into good messes, right?
That's right. Good trouble and good mess. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. So that's great. Well, Michael is, I think, approaching.
Yes, he should be with
Here he
us.
comes.
Here he is. Let's let Michael into the Zoom room.
And here's Michael Coren joining us again, I think, for the third time now on the Vickers Crossing podcast. We've been meeting a lot, Michael, over the last couple of years, which is wonderful. And we welcome you back. How you doing?
Really? What is it? 3? I knew it. I'd done 1. I suppose it is 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a real pleasure. You're my favorite people in the entire world.
Oh,
and I don't say that to anybody else.
Bless her. Now, it will be fair to say, because Michael's got this book out now, and he just told us. So he's been on the CBC and TVO, and now here. Now, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, really.
I mean, there's no comparison. CBC, TVO, Toronto Star, Globe, and all of those. But I mean, this is the one.
This is the one. This is the one. This is it. We always knew this, of course. So welcome back from the UK. You're just back from a big tour over there.
Yeah. About
How
a week.
was it?
And before that, I was in Cancun for our son's wedding, where I officiated.
Wow.
Nice.
But, I'd never drunk tequila before, so I compensated.
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
Well, one time when you and I are at a pub having a beer, I'll tell you my one encounter with tequila, and I've never touched it again, but we won't go into that here. So, well, congratulations to your son and to your family on his wedding too. Listen, before we begin chatting about the book, we've got you coming to London in November. We have a visit planned. You'll be here on Saturday, November 16th at 7:30 p.m., hosted here at St. Paul's Cathedral, where it'll be sort of the downtown London launch of Heaping Coals. And on Sunday morning at 10 a.m., Michael will be the guest preacher here at St. Paul's Cathedral. So we're looking forward to having you. You're looking forward to your visit?
Oh, golly, very much. It's very kind of you. I'm doing a little launch at Toronto Cathedral and Hamilton, which is my diocese, Niagara.
Yeah.
But and there's some other things, but it's quite difficult these days. There was a time there was so much media in Canada, you were everywhere.
Right.
Now, Britain's still doing pretty well, but in Canada, I've written a column for the Post, and I wrote a column. Sorry, not for the Post, God forbid. I wrote a column for the Star, and I wrote another column for the Globe where they mentioned the book.
Yeah. But
beyond that, and I'm doing something for the Walrus that'll mention the book. But there's just not that much left to read. It's quite sobering.
It is sad, really. And a lot of the local stuff is gone, right? Like, I mean, the day was that, if you're coming to London to do this, there were local media outlets that I could call and say, look, I've got Michael Coren coming to town, come and talk to us about this. But now it's the local CBC and pretty much it,
That's it.
Yeah.
So, well, look, this book, folks, if it just released on Tuesday, you're going to be listening to this on Monday, but so it's about a week out. Heaping Coals, from media firebrand to Anglican priest, with the very resplendent Michael Coren on the cover. You need to pick it up and read it, folks. Tell us, Michael, this memoir, Heaping Coals. Say more about the title, if you will, and why now is the right time for you to write a memoir.
Well, the title has nothing to do with me.
Okay.
The title I had, what was the working title? I can't remember. But it was someone at the publishers who, I think they were trying to find some. Anyway, they came up with this title, and I thought, that's pretty good because it's vague enough that people aren't sure. Is it that biblical quote? We're not sure. And I think it works. So that's where the title came from. Why now? Well, I'm very old. I'm 65 years old. And I've written a lot of biographies of dead British writers. And I don't really want to do another one.
No.
And my last book did quite good, quite well, The Rebel Christ.
Yeah.
And Dundon, they wanted another book.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I think it maybe is the time to take it up to ordination. So there's a British writer who I really admire. He's a friend of mine. I admire him very much. And he did a biography, way, way better than mine, but a memoir. And he took it himself to ordination. And in fact, I've signed a contract to do another book, like a diary of a year. But I just wanted to go through my life and sort things out and put it in a linear form and tell some stories, And so I'm pleased. I mean, it's not a very long. It's only 60,000 words. They wanted a shorter book, but that's okay because I think people get a bit tired after too much. But I'm proud of it. My last two books are the books I'm most proud of:
Awesome.
The Rebel Christ and this one. I think it really does. It's honest. I mean, people might not like it. They might not like me, but I am honest in the book.
You really are. And I think that what I like about the last book as well, Rebel Christ, and in this one is the vulnerability in it. I think that that's really what makes it so accessible, at least for me, is that I can relate because you're being so very honest,
Thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, I am. I mean, there are things I didn't say in the book. There are people I didn't talk about, and I'll be absolutely candid with you because litigation can be an issue. There are things I know, but I don't want to be cruel to anyone. But also, the risk of that would be so enervating and so unpleasant. But I was honest about my childhood and my early years, and I think people will be surprised by some of it. I didn't always lead a particularly ethical life. That's for sure. But I think that makes me a better priest because I've got a bit of life experience.
That's true. So talk to us a bit about that, about your upbringing. You write at the beginning of the book a lot about being raised in that working class family. Your dad was a cabbie. You had three grandparents you wrote who were Jewish. And you make note that Judaism, as opposed to Jewishness, runs through the maternal line. And although you're more Jewish, you're more than Jewish enough for some anti-Semites, you're not Jewish enough for some Jews. And you go on to say, having a foot in both camps. And I thought this was, I paused on this when I read it, because I thought about your life and the things that you've been in and out of. You say, having a foot in both camps, being a relative outsider, neither one nor the other, perhaps never quite fitting in, has been a constant theme in my life. Whether it's race, religion, class, or politics, I've seldom been anchored. That's been a comfort and a help, an ache and a wound. I wonder if you can say more about that seldom being anchored and how it's woven its way through your life.
Very perceptive of you. It has been a constant. My father was a cab driver. He was a working class man from a rough part of London, but we probably had more materially than some of my friends whose parents worked in factories. We weren't rich by any means, but as a cabbie, if you work very long hours, you could do okay. So I was never, I was working class, but not completely of the blue collar. I was partly Jewish, but not completely, so didn't quite fit in there. Politically, I've got to a point, I regard myself as a social democrat, liberal, but I am so impatient with politics. Intolerance, lack of forgiveness is, the hard left can be as brutal as the hard right.
Yes.
But I think that it's pushed me, it's formed me, it's molded me, but it has meant that I don't have a place of contentment. I'm more content now than I've ever been in my life as a priest and a journalist and been married for 37 years. But I think growing up, it pushed me in a positive way. Well, not even that, it pushed me. But at the same time, it wounded me. I always felt a bit of an outsider. And you have to be careful about that because a sense of belonging is very important. And even as an Anglican priest, I love the Anglican Church. And there are people in it who you guys and so on, I'm very close to. But it also drives me crazy. And there are times when I just think, why are we doing this? But you will never find a perfect place. As a Christian, I believe you have to cling to Jesus. The word of God is not scripture. The word of God is Jesus. the Word made
Amen.
flesh, and by relationship with Him. And the other stuff is just packaging, really.
Yeah.
But it has been a constant to me, and it's been, I suppose, my my thorn, and I, as I mentioned earlier, I'm more content now than I've ever been, but I still wouldn't say I completely felt as I belong. I mean, I've lived in Canada 37 years.
Mhm.
I feel very British.
Yes.
I go back to Britain. I feel completely part of Britain. Yet I come back here. My family are here, and so much of what I am is here. So that's, there is a story. I think it was George Orwell who recounted this, and it was of German Jewish emigres. German Jews were much wealthier and more assimilated than my family came from Russia and so on.
Yeah.
But German Jews were very different. They were educated and middle class, and I think it was Orwell who told this story, that he saw these German Jewish refugees coming into England in the 1930s, and they saw a British policeman walk past, and one of them said, not as smart as our SS men.
Oh.
So here you have someone who is fleeing what would have been certain death.
Yes.
Yet they still have this pride in what they're from, and which, I mean, exile is a very, on my father's side, we had family members who, I mean, my great aunt, she spoke hardly any English. Right. I used to speak to her in Russian when I was very little.
Wow.
And even though she'd fled persecution, she still lived really as a Russian. The food she ate, what she drank, the way she, but it was my great uncle, who I only met once, and he'd been right through the war in the Red Army. And I mean, he was like a caricature. I mean, he drank vodka from the moment he got up to the moment he went to sleep. And he used to pinch my cheek a lot, hurt. And he said, Michaela, there are two types of vodka.
This is
good
the line.
Vodka, and there's very good vodka.
Very good vodka.
That,
This was the line. I said, this is such a great line. There's good vodka and there's very good vodka.
Very good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's great.
That's
awesome. I love the stories of when you were a young lad in school, and you take us into that space a little bit, Michael. There's this image of young Michael sitting cross-legged on the floor, very attentive to listen to Miss Power read some C.S. Lewis, right, in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Yeah. And there's another encounter that you had with a priest that you talk about when you first encountered death on a very deep level like that. So I just wanted to ask you briefly, can you share a little bit about those experiences for us? You write about them in the book, but really how they were formative for you, because I got the sense that they're important because you still draw from them.
Yeah, I started to think about teachers. I mean, Miss Powell, I was very little, so we're talking about 58 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, I have no idea if she's still alive, as she may be, but I'm sure I was completely in love with her. And at the end of school, the last 10 minutes, the teachers would read to us, and she read to us The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I knew nothing about this book. Lewis died in 1963, so he would have only been dead a couple of years, I suppose, at that point. And I just, this story, I couldn't believe it. I'd never heard anything like it.
Yeah.
And I went home, in those innocent days, you just walked home.
Yeah.
The school was just around the corner. And I said to my mum, Mum, I've got to get this book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And my mum never drove, never learned to drive, never. Yeah. And she went to Leytonstone, a couple of stops on the subway, the underground, and got me this book. And I really think it planted a seed of faith, even though I wasn't aware of it then. And that incident, golly, I mean, I wrote the book a while ago. Was that the priest who I met
in the cemetery? You had
there was after I'd been ordained.
Yes, you ran into him again after you were ordained.
Yes, later. After I'd been ordained, and it was a guy who died. That certainly reminds you of mortality when your contemporaries die. Yeah. And we used to tease him terribly. And I spoke to him and I said, "You probably don't remember me." And he said, I do remember you. And I said, "You wouldn't believe this, but I can't remember the words exactly, but I'm a priest, I'm ordained." And he said, I believe it completely. I'm not surprised at all. I've heard other stories like that, actually.
Yeah.
You never know the impression that you're making on people and they're making on you. But when I say we teased him, it wasn't violent or anything like that. We were just, if we saw any gentleness in a teacher, we'd often exploit it.
That's right.
It wasn't
And he had remarked to you in the cemetery as you were walking away from this burial that, that if you needed to talk, that he had just sort of offered a presence to you, right? This priest.
Yeah.
That's happened to me. I mean, it goes beyond coincidence. People I've met over the years who have been such an influence on me, and seem to see inside me somehow. They see something maybe I'm not aware of. I mean, that's happened quite a bit. But my life has not been that eventful. And I think everybody has stories like this, but there are things that have happened that are really quite incredible when I think about it. And the chances of me, when you have to meet someone, say at 2:15 in the afternoon, and you leave home at a certain point, and you get there at exactly 2:15.
Yeah.
And it's happened to me many times. And how did that actually happen? And roughly, how long it's going to take, but there's something I think that's beyond us that goes on, and the chances of me meeting the woman I married in Toronto, that I wasn't going to come. I was asked to come to speak at the University of Toronto in 1986. I thought, do I really want to go? If I can be bothered. If I hadn't, my life would have been totally different. Meeting her and all of I think it is more than coincidence, really. I mean, some people say, no, of course, that's not it. It happens. But I think there's more going on.
And what a great moment of grace to affirm you in that moment too, right? Like I knew that. I'm a priest. Well, I knew that. Yeah, like that's just amazing.
And maybe he uses that line on everybody. I don't.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
You say that to all the boys.
That's right. You write too about your early experiences in Israel. And you emphasize that your time there is always kind of made you suspicious of people who are, you say, instant experts on the Middle East. And certainly we're watching things unfold there right now in Israel and Gaza and Lebanon. It's all horrifying. And of course, we're hearing opinions in the extreme from all sides. And this is just a short quote from the book I wanted to share with our listeners. You write, there are two truths in existence in Israel and Palestine, and they have lived and died together for more than 75 years. With each new outrage being merely a symptom of the original injustice. There is a litany of realities that are often overlooked. It won't be solved by hard left platitudes or hard right blindness, but by something far more complex and revolutionary. Taking absolute positions is easy and comfortable, but ultimately pointless. Can you share more about this? I find that powerful.
Thank you. Well, I first went in 1979. Radically different country then. The population has been transformed since then, and religion plays a major role now on both sides, which it didn't then. I mean, some people assume that on both sides were always radical in their faith. Not true. Most Israelis you met would say, oh, well, I'm not religious. And you just didn't see, ultra-religious people, they lived in their own little areas, but modern Orthodox, the term that's used now, that's fairly recent. And in fact, the elites of the bureaucracy and the military and political class tended to come from the kibbutz movement, and they were more left-wing. And within Palestinian society, Christians were far more prominent, a more moderate Islam. Things have changed dangerously over the years. When I was there, I went there for a few reasons. I wanted to spend quite a long time there, actually. I was researching a thesis for university on pre-state terrorism, a group known as the Stern Gang. Lehi is what they're known as in Hebrew, but I was researching that to write for university. And I also met a girl, an Israeli Arab. These terms are quite significant. She was Palestinian, but she was an Israeli citizen. There were Palestinians who, in 1948, remained within Israel for various reasons. So they're no different ethnically from those Palestinians who live in the West Bank in particular. Gaza's a little different. But they were included just by circumstance in Israel. So she was raised, her Hebrew was fluent, and she was a citizen with the full rights of an Israeli. And her parents were doctors, both of them were doctors, and she was middle class. She actually came from Cana,
Mm.
Well, the first miracle was, of course, right, that they lived in life. Anyway, I mean, she had a wonderful life, but she said to me once, they lead me to water, but they won't let me drink.
Mm.
And I would go out with her, and it was very interesting how quickly, well, her name gave it away as well.
Mm-hmm.
But often you show ID, and it wasn't that she was treated badly, but there was security everywhere. We just go into a bar or somewhere, a restaurant, and they'd see her name, and you could see the way they reacted, and it wasn't aggressive, but it was different because they knew who she was. She was an Israeli Arab. She wasn't a Jew, and she wasn't angry, but she left. She went. Last time I spoke to her, she lives in Latin America, as a lot of Palestinian Christians in particular do.
Yeah.
You hear Spanish being spoken sometimes in the West Bank. It's quite curious. And I saw both sides, and you see the humanity in people. And what irritates me about the hard left is this constant arrogance. They know everything, and colonial apartheid. Although I think there is perhaps a form of apartheid, but that's another issue. But look, if Christians had treated Jews properly, there's a very good chance Israel would never have existed. Jews were treated so badly by every country in Europe. It wasn't so bad in the Muslim world, but in Europe, I'm not just talking about the Holocaust here, pogroms and expulsions, and this is a people who were desperate, and there was a homeland, a people without a land, to a land without a people. The problem was there were people in that land. Now, not the numbers that perhaps some people claim, but there were Palestinians living there. Yeah. And it is an open wound for Palestinians. There is an injustice here, and it's never been properly solved. And I don't know what's going to happen this time round, but there's a very good chance the Iranian regime would topple. And if that happened, and you had a moderate regime in Tehran, and you had Saudi Arabia, two powers that really wouldn't care very much about the Palestinians and want peace with Israel. There'd be no more war as such, but the Palestinians would still be left without justice. And so I do see the extremes. I see on the one side, Israel can do no right, and the other side, Israel can do no wrong. And the answer is in the middle. And many Israelis express this opinion, and they're moderate, and they understand the problems in their society and how divided they are. Yeah. And I'm very disappointed in some of the things coming out of both Christian Zionists on the right and the hard left as well. I don't mean moderate left. I mean the hard left, which sees everything through the prism of Marxism, and I mean that's childish. It doesn't apply, and they seem to have no understanding of the Jewish experience, the history of the Jewish people. Who, there were, well, for example, that part of my family who came from just outside of Odessa. My great uncle was in the Red Army all the way to the end of the war. He was a major, he was a captain, but temporary major, and loads of medals and very proud and so on. And in his lifetime, there was an anti-Semitic campaign. Stalin was about to purge the Jews just before he died in the Doctor's Plot. But even later on, the Zionism we're not anti-Semitic, but you must be a Zionist, to people who'd not even thought about Zionism or Israel.
That's right.
So that anti-Semitism, so where are they meant to go? Polish Jews in 1968, there was a purge of Polish Jews. Yeah. Even all they'd gone through in the war, and now they thought, well, Poland is settled and we live in, then they had to leave. Yeah. So we're not talking about a people who said, I know, let's leave all of these European countries and let's go to a desert somewhere and really make life hard for Palestinians. Right. Yes. That isn't what it's about. That doesn't mean that there's not an injustice. There is. Yes. But let's understand why and qualify our comments by that understanding.
Well, and I think that's the thing is, and of course we're living in such highly loaded, polarized times that, I love the turn of, like the way you described it in the book, when you say, people become immediate experts, and it's frustrating on all ends. On something a little lighter, but not so much, oddly, is my friend Morgan would not let me sleep again if I didn't ask you about the Hotspurs, right? So, but there's something a little serious in this too. Like when I read about your experience of being a Tottenham fan, right? And the anti-Semitism in football, in British football. And you actually did some work on this, right? Like, I mean, this is not just something you studied this, so I wonder if you could say a little bit about your love for the Spurs, of course, and about growing up in a Jewish household, a hot Spurs fan, and experiencing some of that racism in football circles. I mean, I don't think people here understand how rooted it is.
I mean, I wouldn't overestimate it because it was limited to certain groups within certain clubs. But Tottenham is traditionally had quite a Jewish community, east end of London into Tottenham. Mind you, Arsenal probably have as many Jewish fans as Tottenham do, really.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of sociology involved in the television show, and it was a couple of teams in particular in London, Chelsea being the worst one, and they would chant anti-Semitic abuse when Tottenham were playing. So Tottenham fans sort of took ownership. But the vast majority of people at a Tottenham game are not Jewish.
Right.
I don't know what percentage is, 10%, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
But they took on this identity as being a Jewish team. It's not confined to England. Ajax in Amsterdam regard themselves as being a Jewish team. You'll see Stars of David being waved, even though they're not Jewish.
Wow.
And Feyenoord in Rotterdam have a bit of a far-right following.
Yeah.
You have a team in Argentina, I think even in Germany. So it's interesting how that develops. But Tottenham, I mean, even now, I'm not going to say the word, but Tottenham fans chant a word. Yeah. And the commentators will never mention it. But if you listen when Tottenham, you can hear this. And what they're saying is actually an abusive term for Jewish people, but they've taken ownership of it. And this is who we are. And now it's I don't see it as an issue now at all, really. But when I was a kid, it was bad.
It was bad.
And if you were far right, if you were like, there weren't many fascists in England. I mean, it's always been a tiny fringe. But if you were a Chelsea fan.
Yeah.
And they had an organized far right. Again, a small minority of their support, but and it was bad. I mean, it wasn't now you'd be arrested. But back then, they unrolled this column 88 banner. 8 is the 8th letter of the alphabet, H, Heil Hitler. And they just unfold this thing. And they would make hissing noises when Tottenham players ran on the field, which is meant to be the gas escaping at Auschwitz. I mean, this is how appalling it was.
Oh my God!
This simply, the police they'd be banned for life. But back then it was an issue, and there was violence involved. And I mean, now I do know Chelsea supporters, but I have dear friends who are West Ham fans. These are people I love very much. We're long past that, and but it was quite problematic.
You had a great description in the book of you sort of dressing yourself and being insistent that you were going to be a hoodlum, but it didn't work, did it?
Yeah. I was way too soft for that. My mum and dad came from a tough generation, and my dad was a boxer, and my mum, I mean, some of the people she was, I mean, she was from Stepney Green. She knew the Cray twins. I mean, they were just they were local. I mean, they were. Anyway, I mean, they were, but I was a softie, but I dressed the part. And when I was a teenager, fights would start, and you'd always know because there'd be this chanting. So the Tottenham fans chanting and the other team chanting, and it's when the chanting stopped.
Yeah.
It went silent, and then you see these things, and the fight, and you think, and it gets further and further back, but it never quite got to me because of the real hard nuts, and the police would get involved. But I do remember once at a Tottenham Arsenal game, where I had red hair when I was a kid, ginger hair.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I put this in the book or not, but this cop, he grabbed me around the neck and he lifted me up.
Did, yeah.
I was being hanged, and he said, "Come here, Ginger." And
it is in the book.
I was a softie, really.
It is in the book. Anyway, I'm sure it's that you were a softie that your wife Bernie was so attracted to you. But can you say a little bit about, you mentioned her earlier, talk to our listeners a bit about meeting her, about your move to Canada, and what all that was like for you,
Well, in 1986, I was writing a biography of G.K. Chesterton, and he died in 36. So it was the 50th anniversary of his death. out of copyright in many parts of the world. And there was a big anniversary conference at St. Michael's College at U of T.
Mm.
And a big conference. I mean, there were dozens of speakers and hundreds of people there. It was a big event. And they invited me to come over and give a lecture. I'd never been to Canada, never been to North America. Wasn't sure if I wanted to go. Came over and I gave my paper. I was much younger than anybody else there. Any of the speakers. I mean, they were academics and I was in my mid 27. Yeah. And anyway, there was a sort of cocktail party afterwards, and this beautiful young woman came up to me, and I think just nervous, really. And she said, "You're amazing." And thinking this may never happen again.
You dog. You dog.
Do it.
It hasn't happened again, by the way.
Yeah.
I sort of asked her out very nervously, and we were married less than a year later. So, it's very odd when someone who read the book, actually a senior editor at the Toronto Star, a dear friend of mine, he said, "I love it." He said, "But I still don't quite understand why you left for Canada, because you had so much going on." And I did.
You did.
I'd achieved a big deal very early, but I wasn't content. And I think I fell in love with everything about Bernadette. And I thought, I don't know, I just came over quite irresponsibly. I can be very irresponsible. And, I've been here most of my life and I love it. But I do miss Britain. The older I get, in fact, the more nostalgic. And I still feel viscerally quite, I mean, I love Canada. I'm a Canadian, but I do still feel British. I mean, when I talk about England football or rugby, it's the collective we. We. And maybe I've said that about Canada, but I can't pretend. I still really feel quite British, English.
And listen, not just to pick up on something you just said, because I think that you've become quite something here in Canada in your own right. Don't undersell that. But for a young man who was only 27 when you came here, and you write about this in the book, the circles that you had been in because of the work that you were doing and the people that you had met, a lot of British celebrities, a lot of people across the politics and entertainment in the United Kingdom. I mean, you had quite a bit going on.
I did. And I was very lucky. People have been quite good to me. And I did know, I mean, I think of the people I sort of lost touch with. I write about Colin Welland in the book. And Colin, he won't be known to most people, but he won the Oscar. He was a screenwriter and an actor. He won the Oscar for Chariots of Fire.
Yeah.
And he wrote many other movies. And I met Colin. I interviewed him for a magazine. He was very well known in Britain, especially after winning the Oscar, but he'd been an actor in lots of things as well. And we really got on. And he said, I need a researcher. You're interested? I mean, just like that. And I said, yeah. And we worked together on a couple of movies. And I remember going over after I was married and Bernadette holding the Oscar. And then I sort of lost touch with Colin. He's gone now. And it's a great shame. And but a lot of people, I mean, most of my dear friends I have kept in contact with in Britain. But yeah, it is strange in a way. So I came here, I got a job at the CBC. They were very good to me. And people were quite open. The Toronto Star started giving me work immediately. And things really developed very well. I think Canada did allow me to be the person I wanted to be. I think in Britain, I still felt a bit trapped by the class system. I was a sort of upper working class kid. And Britain was very open to people who were very working class. But it was still, the power was in the hands of a fairly small group of people. None of that worries me now at all. When I go back now, I'm indifferent to it. But back then, I think I did feel a bit of a chip on my shoulder. But
you had a really good run for a while at CTS, 12 years. You write about that in the book, Crossroads Television System. And as I was recalling it, I think that's the first time I ever saw you. I used to watch Crossroads because it was a point in my life that I was searching for a lot of different, parts of Christianity that I was trying to find my way in, and Crossroads was one of them. And I actually ended up there with my family one day getting a tour when our kids were little. We were in the studios and such. But I remember seeing some of that show. You were there from 99 to 2011, and quite a assortment of guests over the years that you write about, Canadian politicians. You talk to faith leaders, you talk to authors. The most exciting, though, as I was reading it, and I'm sorry I missed this, but you got to talk to some of the cast of The Lord of the Rings, which was pretty cool. That would have been more exciting than any Canadian politician to me, but That's just
We
me.
still have photo. Yeah, I'm in Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were loved. David
Yeah.
Maines, God rest his soul, was so good to me. David was a Pentecostal of a former generation. It wasn't that he was a conservative man, but
Yeah.
from that background, he was surprised. He was wonderfully progressive. I mean, Tony Campolo, who I'm sure you know,
Yes.
Tony once said to me, he said, when I come here, they have me on every single time I'm here in this place. He said, in the US, no Christian TV will have me on.
I was going to say that was no small thing to have Tony Campolo on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was David's influence. David defended me. There were people I worked with. There were many lovely people. There were people who were not good people. I'm sorry, but they weren't. And I haven't named them.
Yeah.
But I can think of one or two in particular who were not good people.
Yeah.
And they didn't like what I did.
Yeah.
Because I would have people, it was a debate show and I loved it. So, we have Labour leaders on and we have NDP leaders on. And I'm not saying I agree with you, but I respect your point of view. I want a debate to take place here. And they wanted one uniform opinion every single, and I just wouldn't do that. So David really supported me. And I mean, my golly, when I think of Benjamin Netanyahu we had on.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Like, what do you remember what your take on him was at the time? And like, can you compare and contrast what to him today? Or
no, I do remember about that. Is he comes in with like about a number of at least half a dozen bodyguards.
So he had an entourage.
Wow.
Yeah, and he doesn't really know who he's going to speak to. I mean, the man's very busy, obviously, but I have a bit of Hebrew. Yeah. And I spoke to him and I could see his face. And I got the impression he was thinking, okay, this is going to be a different interview. Yeah. Because he's very good. And he knew it was a Christian-based TV station. Yeah. And he's very good at playing that Christian Zionist card. Yeah. And I think he realized maybe I have to play this a bit differently. But politicians were never the most impressive people to interview. But they didn't really know what they had on that TV show. And I wouldn't have, David moved on and new people came in and there were some real problems there. Yeah. And in the end, Sun TV, Sun News were calling me on a regular basis, offering me more than twice as much money to do my own show on their new channel. And I didn't leave, but circumstance again, the people at Crossroads said, we don't have the money we have. We need to cut back a bit. So you can't have any guests on the show anymore. What we'd like to do is a live 11 p.m. phone-in show.
Oh, dear.
And I said, you want me to do a radio show at 11 p.m. And I've done those on radio. No one calls in on television.
Yeah.
And so I had Sun News saying, we're going to give you this amount of money, wonderful offer. And so I said to them at CTS, I'm sorry, I'm turning it down. And I think they were rather surprised. But it's a work thing. And I met wonderful people through it and it was marvelous. But it came to an end because when I had this change about 10, 11 years ago, in many of my views, they would never have tolerated that. Well, I know that because, as I say in the book, they asked me to come back after Sun News collapsed. They asked me to be a guest host on 100 Huntley Street, which I did. And then they wrote to me and said, I'm afraid we can't have you on anymore because of your views on gay marriage.
Good Lord.
And I said to them, but I've never mentioned that issue on your show. I wouldn't, out of respect for you. And they said, yeah, but people know what you think.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was, interesting.
Wow.
Interesting.
Was that time, now that you look back, like, can you see where it was formative for your ministry today, your work as a pastor, your work as a priest? Did you take something from that?
From the TV?
Yeah, from doing all that and all those people and all those experiences.
You get a lot of life experience. I mean, it wasn't just famous people or political people, literary people. I met people who lost their children to murder, victims of terrorism. I mean, you meet a lot of people. I mean, you learn things. I mean, I feel very strongly about that in terms of clergy. We need young clerics, of course we do, but sometimes I meet people and I think, good Lord, do you have any life experience?
True.
Do you really, what have you seen? And it's a difficult one because on the one hand, youth is essential, but is youth
Mhm.
sufficient experience? But I know older people who don't seem to experience anything either. So,
It's true.
but yeah, I believe everything uh, should be a contribution to a clerical career. I mean, everything that's happened to you, both good and bad,
Yeah.
you in the way you deal with people.
Yeah. You share a story in one article you wrote. You say that changed your life forever. The headline of the article was titled, "I Was Wrong." And in it, you spoke of your change in views on homosexuality. And the article led to a plethora of negative, angry, and threatening responses. One response you shared in the book was from a person who told you, "Sir, you will be paid with eternal hell and damnation." At least he called you sir. You say this was something that you were unprepared for, and that you thought that it would largely go unnoticed. Looking back, what do you think you missed about the deep-rooted conviction people had about this subject, especially since you were so connected to some of those understandings at the time?
Yeah.
Like, what was missing? Like,
By the way, that comment was very mild. I mean,
Yeah. I was going to say this is a family show.
Yeah. Well, that column, if you read it now, is very soft.
Yes.
I mean, all I said, I didn't even say I supported equal marriage. What I said was, I'm sorry for any pain and hurt and harm I've caused to people.
Yeah.
And we must think of a new conversation between the gay community and Christians. I don't remember every detail of it, but it was hard. It wasn't a hard hitting what I've written since then many times.
Yeah.
And it was in the Sun. You know, I was a syndicated columnist for the entire Sun group. So I remember Kathleen Wynne, God bless her. She's still premier, wasn't she? Wrote to me. All sorts of people wrote to me the most beautiful letters. One man, I won't say his name, but he believe me, you know who he is. He's famous. And he wrote to me and he said, "I used to hate you." He said, because I thought you wrote so beautifully, and you wrote a piece about your dad once in the Globe and Mail, and it made me cry. And then I'd read your views on me and who I am and my partner, and I couldn't understand it. And it was beautiful what he wrote. It was so forgiving, and I received loads like that. But the first stage of abuse, at this point, it was really people saying, "What are you saying here? Are you saying it isn't sinful? Are you saying this? Are you saying that?" A few cancellations began. But being the way I am, it just made me, I think more and push back. And I was very befriended, love bombed in a way by the gay Christian community, who taught me so much, what they've had to put up with over the years. And I became not radicalized, but more certain in my views on that issue. So maybe I was naive. My view at my worst, and I did cause harm, and I've never denied that. I've always been open about that for years. I've tried to repair any damage done. I've been contrite, and I've paid a price. I mean, I lost almost everything in my professionally. But my view was, I always said, civil union, full protection under the law for inheritance, property. A gay couple should everything apart from marriage. So that wasn't an extreme position in a way, but because I expressed it with an English accent, with a certain degree of intelligence, I think I actually caused a lot of harm. I'm sure I hurt people, but my views weren't based on hatred. And some people might say, "Well, you seem pretty hateful," and I accept that, but they weren't. So it was a theological view. At that point, I couldn't see the justification, the reconciliation of being gay with being Christian. I changed my view radically. What I received huge amounts of was people who simply hated, in particular, gay men.
Yes.
It was interesting how seldom women were mentioned. I mean, this obsession with gay, and what they would write to me, they'd send me pictures, and I mean, my death threats, and they went after one of my daughters.
And your family, yeah.
Well, particularly, I mean, we have 4 kids. They're all straight. I mean, I couldn't care less, but they haven't always straight. But they got this idea in their head, either that one of the kids was gay, or that I'd had a breakdown, or I was having an affair. Or the classic for me was, well, he's doing this for money. And I think to myself, I was.
Sorry.
I mean, if you want to make money in media, be on the right. I
Yes.
was
Not it.
speaking. I sold 45,000 copies of my book on Roman Catholicism. I
Yes.
was speaking all over North America. I was writing columns for every Catholic publication in the English language almost. I was
Yeah.
making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it just all disappeared. And I understand that. Okay, fair enough. But
Yeah.
it's just so ludicrous. He's doing it. Where is this money? I mean, it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But they had to try and find a reason. Why has he? It couldn't be maybe through prayer and reading of scripture and experience with people. He has changed his view as a Christian. No, it has to be bad. It has to be evil. It has to be malicious. There must be a reason and a motive. And
Yeah.
that surprised me. And the level I mean, and I don't hear it now. It's been years. But there was a time when, I'd open my Twitter page and it was just full of
Vitriol.
and the personal stuff that was sent to me as well.
Yeah.
Now they were good. They were nice. There were people who said, "I'm sorry, Mike. I'll pray for you. I simply can't agree with you." There were people like that. And I remember a very senior Catholic leader in Canada who wrote to me and said, "I don't agree with you, but you're my friend. You'll always be in my prayers." So but that was a minority. Most of the critical stuff was vicious. And there was huge waves of wonderful, forgiving, loving stuff as well. And there were people who said, well, okay, this is nice, but I want to see what happens here. Let's get this guy to prove himself. Well, it's been more than 10 years, so I think I have. But I thought I was completely experienced and worldly. I was naive in that way. I didn't. And gay people have said to me since, Mike, we could have told you. I mean, it's not just, I'm sorry, I can't agree. Yeah.
Next time, come to ask us first.
That's
right. So near the end of the book, of course, you talk a bit about your last couple of years of your life and entering into ordination and this new space you find yourself in now. And you write about the experience of preparing for ordination, and you take us to the night before. And this was such a moving paragraph. I wanted to share some of it with our listeners and ask you about that. But you're right. The night before my ordination, I knelt in front of the crucifix in my study at home with a single candle, illuminating it in the otherwise darkened room. When I could kneel no longer, I sat, reciting prayers, reading from my prayer book and Bible, and asking for help in what was to come. I must have been there several hours because I woke up sitting in the same chair, the candle having burnt out. And I know it's not wise to fall asleep leaving a burning candle. And I hadn't had much rest, but I felt so alive, so full of enthusiasm and energy. If there had been any reservations, they had disappeared with the flame of that candle. And I'm reading that, and of course, it speaks to me personally, and I'm sure it speaks to many clergy as we remember that night before, as a reminder of that experience of entering into that holy space. But more so, I thought reading that, this is more about an image of someone preparing for ordination. This is about that common human experience that we can all connect to about, entering into those transformational places in our lives that we all do, and the fear and apprehension and the self-doubt that inevitably comes with that. Because as much as we think we've accumulated all the worldly knowledge and education and experience, we're still quite vulnerable. And I wonder if you could just say more about what that was like for you, especially, what it means to go, as you say, outside of ourselves for guidance and keep asking and asking and asking.
And asking. I love that. Asking and asking and asking. I loved it. Yeah.
I have times when I never question my ordination or my faith at all, but I do question me. I know me. I'm not a bad person, but I'm a very ordinary and flawed person. And am I fit for office? I can preach, and I think I'm compassionate, but there's something more than that. And when I'm presiding at the altar, am I really worthy of this? And I'm not being falsely modest. I know, I mean, when I first consecrated, I was shaking. That doesn't happen anymore. But there are times when I do feel overwhelmed. But I think we should always question ourselves. Are we worthy of this? I mean, it's the first I've taken, I don't know, 40 odd funerals, getting for 50 funerals now. with the first funeral I took, and the woman who died, her husband, he's gone now actually. He was in a wheelchair, and at the end of the funeral, he gave me this envelope, and there was cash in it. I didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Can't. But we're paid to do funerals, and I just felt, I cried afterwards, and I don't know how Catholic clergy do it, because I've had to pour stuff out to my wife sometimes. It doesn't happen often these days, but it might be a long day, and you've been from hospital to care home to hospital, and you just feel overwhelmed by people's pain. And not because I'm that good a person, I'm just a person. I mean, it gets to you, and I've got to go back to what I swore I would do, and what I think it is to be a priest. And I look to people. There are certain people in my life, clergy I know in the UK really, but also some of the people I work with, and they do inspire me. But questioning oneself, I think that's a good thing, and it should. The day you think you got, many years ago, someone said to me, it was a monk actually. He said, I was talking about prayer, and he said, well, if ever you think you've really conquered it, you know what you're doing in prayer, start again.
Start again.
And, I think that's good advice. I mean, it is until our dying day. I mean, it's we learn, we change the way we do things, we develop. But if ever you feel I am totally confident as a priest, I know exactly what I'm doing and I'm in control, then I would really question that person.
Yeah. Well, thank you for entering that in that vulnerability. I thought that was just so powerful. And
that's why, I mean, it's I remember when I first wore a collar, and I wear it a lot because I like to sort of represent, and it's quite interesting what happens, I find. I don't have much time for clergy. Oh, I'm not going to wear the collar in public. Why would I do that? Well, because it's not about you actually, mate. It's like, if you've ever done anything with the military, when you salute, you're saluting the uniform, or in Britain actually, and Canada, I suppose, as well, you're saluting the crown. But it's not the individual. I mean, when I was in the officer training corps, there was one guy in particular I thought was I won't say the word, and having to salute him, but I wasn't saluting him. I was saluting what he represented. And as a priest, it's not about, I mean, I hope I said this in the book, as a priest, show them Jesus and then get out of the bloody way.
That's right.
It's not about you. And look at me, look at the charisma, and look at this, and look at this. You see, think. I mean, I don't want to name any names, but think about churches, major leaders, and something happens, abuse or whatever, a scandal, and it all collapses because even if they don't want it to be, it's about me. Well, it's not about you.
Yes.
At best, you're a conduit, but you're really just pulling back the curtain. There it is.
Right.
Now get out the way.
That's right.
Exactly.
We should be pointing towards something, and everything we have at our disposal, if it's, wearing a collar or not wearing a collar in a certain context, you do what you got to do to point towards Jesus, right? Like that's the point.
Yeah.
I was in England the last World Cup. Yeah, must have been. And I wore my collar, and I would go to pubs to see games, and it's very interesting because it's a bit unfair because people think they can't swear. Believe me, I can swear with the best of them, but
I usually dispel that in the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, but it's interesting how people do it, particularly in the UK, but in Canada as well, the way people do react to a collar, because they don't see it that often.
No.
Yeah.
And I've seen them look, and then they might see the wedding ring, and they think, "Oh, okay, so he's not a Catholic."
Yeah.
One of those kind.
Yeah. Yeah. But I've had people speaking to me, coming up, and they feel Alec Guinness, the late actor, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan, there's a name I haven't heard in a very long time.
That's
very
right.
long time. Yeah.
And
exactly.
Anyway, Alec Guinness was a very devout Catholic. He was a convert, and he made the Father Brown movie before the TV shows and so on. He made a movie on Father Brown, and they made it in France. And he tells a story. He wrote several volumes of memoir, very good. That he was dressed as a Catholic priest playing Father Brown, and he's walking back to, I don't know where he's staying, and suddenly he feels this little hand. Little boy's grabbed his hand, and the little boy is looking up at him and just speaking really quickly to him in French. And Alec Guinness couldn't follow what he was saying. But it was the trust this little boy had. I mean, in a way, this is very sad, isn't it? Because of clergy who, well, you know.
Yeah.
But he was so struck by it, the trust this little boy had in him. And I do think that is still there. I mean, I have had people have poured their hearts out to me.
That's right.
You know, you guys know as well as I do, better than I do.
Yeah.
Loneliness is such a big problem.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah, huge. The book is Heaping Coals, From Media Firebrand to Anglican Priest. And there it is, Michael Coren. And you can get the book and you can meet Michael. And we'll even bring pens so Michael can sign the book for you on the 16th of November at St. Paul's Cathedral. So come on out to that and look forward to having Michael with us. And as always, my friend, thank you so much for spending the time with us here on our little podcast. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thanks again, Michael, for being here. And we'll look forward to seeing him in person on the 16th.
Yep.
And come on out. Yeah, have a chat and grab a book. And it'll be just nice to be together. And I know he's preaching at the cathedral, right? On the Sunday,
yes, on the 17th. So you'll be 16th at 7:30 in the evening here, November 16th, and then the 17th in the morning at 10 o'clock. So
sorry, I can't come to that, buddy.
No, you have this church thing, do you?
I gotta go to church.
We'll get to,
I can't go to church. I gotta go to church.
We'll have to do something on the 16th with them then, and we'll do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Heaping Coals, From Media Firebrand to Anglican Priest with Michael Coren. Thanks for coming, everybody, and dropping in and listening. Thanks to our sponsors today, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London, Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. Thank you, Bishop Todd and the Diocese of Huron, for your continued supports, and of course to Molly Maid, where you can make your home a healthy haven and call Molly Maid London today. And that's a wrap for Kevy and I. And until we meet again, remember, my friend, to always look both ways
before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!